Well, meanwhile, Moscow launched 67 missiles and nearly 200 drones against Ukraine's energy and gas infrastructure overnight. It was the first major missile attack since the White House paused intelligence sharing with Kyiv. The strikes hit targets across the country, from Kharkiv in the east all the way to Ternopil in the west. And despite incendiary language aimed almost exclusively at the Ukrainian president since he returned to the White House in January, on Friday, Donald Trump threatened new sanctions and tariffs, not on Ukraine this time, but on Russia over the latest bombing campaign against the Ukrainians. For more, France 24's international affairs editor Philip Turl joins me on set. Hi, Philip. Lots of back and forth from the White House on a range of issues, Russia and Ukraine included. So how do you assess these latest remarks from Donald Trump?
Every day there is a statement of some sort from the White House, either to do with tariffs, Canada, Mexico, or to do with the war in Ukraine, or other matters within Europe as well. We've just seen that spat with the French President Emmanuel Macron. So today, Donald Trump has just announced that he is calling on Russia to get to the negotiating table. That, I think, follows those attacks overnight that you were just referring to, with those 60 missile attacks and 200 drone attacks in Ukrainian territory. I'll read you this statement from President Trump. He says, based on the fact that Russia is pounding Ukraine on the battlefield, I'm strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement has been reached. And then he says to Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it is too late. So a strong-worded threat from President Trump, not directed for once to Ukraine, but this time to Russia. This is a change in direction for the US president. Remember, he's hinted about lifting sanctions against Russia. The United States voted with Russia in favor of a peace deal that didn't recognize the sovereignty of Ukraine. That was at the United Nations just a week ago. That was a bust-up last Friday, this time in the Oval Office between President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. So now we're seeing the shift moving from Ukraine to the Russians. What does that mean? I think that basically means that Donald Trump's been very critical of Ukraine, but we haven't really heard anything from the Russians. And what has been clear all the way down the line is that whatever happens in this war, Vladimir Putin's made it pretty clear that if there's nothing that he agrees with, then he's not going to end the war. He prefers to carry on fighting. He thinks he's got more to gain, especially with the way the United States is behaving right now, by keeping the war going. All of a sudden, Donald Trump seems to have changed position and is now threatening the Russians. Will that have an effect? Well, we'll have to wait and see, but certainly this is another of those unpredictable moves by the U.S. president.
It is true, Philip, that prior to that whole spat with Volodymyr Zelensky, it was one of the things that he said initially in his first days in office, that Russia was not out of the hole with the United States, that they risked facing more sanctions. So we'll see which of those two positions will win. Now, in the meantime, of course, Philip, the Ukrainian president said Friday that the first steps to achieving real peace would be for both sides to halt aerial and naval attacks. How likely is that to happen?
Pretty unlikely, I think, right now. The Russians have made it clear that they're not interested in that deal, because they say basically that this is going to let the Ukrainian army rebuild its resources, and therefore it's not good news for the Russians. And what they're saying about these attacks last night was that they may have hit energy infrastructures, but they are hitting areas that are beneficial to the Ukrainian military. That is the whole point of those attacks, according to the Russian side. So this is not the first time that Volodymyr Zelensky has made that request for a cessation of air activities and sea activities. It's fallen on deaf ears pretty much until now, as has the call for this peacekeeping force, the coalition of the willing, if you like, to bring in this peacekeeping force into Ukraine. That's also been dismissed by the Russians as a no-go. The Russians see that as basically nothing more than NATO getting its foothold in Ukraine, and that for them is something that is totally unacceptable. In the next few days, what have we got? We've got Volodymyr Zelensky traveling to Saudi Arabia to meet Mohammed bin Salman ahead of new peace discussions there. Then we have Volodymyr Zelensky going to South Africa to meet the President Cyril Ramaphosa. That'll be next month. Cyril Ramaphosa, who's been also proposing to intervene to try to find a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. So there is a lot of diplomatic activity taking place right now. But for the moment, still those bombing raids taking place on Ukrainian territory from the Russians.